He offered a ride to a girl, hitchhiking in the rain, not knowing she was a runaway heiress worth billions. Rain fell in sheets, relentless and cold, slashing across the highway like nature's fury had awakened with no intention of mercy. Luke's windshield wipers fought to keep up, the rhythmic thump the only sound in his truck, besides the low hum of the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, catching glints of silver on the wet asphalt. He squinted, leaning forward slightly. That was when he saw her. A girl, barely more than a silhouette at first. She stood at the edge of the road, soaked from head to toe, hair clinging to her face, her arm outstretched, with a desperate thumb pointing toward the endless highway. She looked like she had been standing there for hours. Luke slowed the truck, tires hissing on the wet pavement, and rolled the window down a few inches. "Need a lift?" he called out over the sound of the rain. She stepped closer, hesitated. Her voice was tight and hoarse. I got turned around. I was trying to get to town, but I think I walked the wrong way. I don't have a phone. Could I ride with you? Just until the next stop?" Luke studied her face in the dim light. She was young, maybe mid-20s. Her clothes were damp and thin, her eyes guarded but not wild. He could see she was exhausted, vulnerable, and yet still upright, still trying to move forward. "Hop in," he said, reaching across to unlock the door. She climbed into the passenger seat, wrapping her arms around herself. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the seat. Luke handed her the blanket he kept behind his seat, and she took it wordlessly, teeth chattering softly. "Thanks," she muttered after a moment, voice barely above a whisper. They drove in silence for a while, the truck weaving carefully through the rain-slicked curves of the road. After a few minutes, Luke broke the quiet. "Name's Luke. I run a small motel up the road, trying to keep it from falling apart." She glanced at him, then turned back to the road ahead. "Ella," she said. "Just Ella." He nodded, not pushing further. "You from around here?" There was a pause. "Not really." "Family nearby?" Another pause, longer this time. "No." Luke didn't ask again. Some silences did not need to be filled. They rode the rest of the way without much more talk. The rain began to lighten as they reached the outskirts of town, but the streets were empty. Luke turned onto a gravel road and pulled into a small parking lot beside a two-story building with a flickering neon sign that read Sunset Inn. The motel was clearly old, its siding weathered, but the windows glowed warm and the front porch light cut through the gloom like a beacon. Luke parked and killed the engine. "I've got a few rooms open," he said. "Nothing fancy, but dry and with heat. You can stay tonight. No charge." Ella blinked. I don't have any money." "I figured," Luke said with a half smile. "But it's cold, and you look like you've had enough of that. I won't ask questions. Just stay until the storm passes." She stared at him for a moment, lips slightly parted, then nodded. "Okay, thank you." Luke handed her the key to room 7 and led her up the steps. The wooden porch creaked under their weight. He opened the door to a small room, simple but clean. A worn bed, a dresser, a lamp glowing warmly in the corner. "There's soup left from dinner. I'll bring you some." "You don't have to. I know," he said, "but I'm going to." She stood in the doorway, still holding the blanket tightly around her, watching him like he might disappear if she blinked too long. "Good night, Ella," Luke said gently. "Good night," she replied. And for the first time since she had gotten in his truck, there was something in her voice besides fear. Luke walked back out into the rain, leaving the door open just a little longer than needed, just enough to let her know that she wasn't alone anymore. The Sunset Inn stood quiet beneath the gray stretch of winter sky, its paint faded and porch sagging, but within those creaking walls something was beginning to shift. Ella woke before dawn, the warmth of the borrowed blanket still clinging to her shoulders. She moved quietly, careful not to wake Luke, who she assumed was still asleep somewhere in one of the back rooms. But he was already up, kneeling near the front step with a hammer in hand, replacing a warped floorboard. "Morning," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. "I was wondering if you needed help with anything." Luke hesitated. "You don't have to. I meant it when I said the room's free." "I know," she replied, "but I'd feel better if I could do something. I'm not used to not helping." He nodded, jerking his thumb toward a stack of folded linens by the counter. "Laundry's piled up. You sure?" She was already moving. "Yes." From that moment on, Ella became a quiet presence around the inn. She cleaned rooms, swept the halls, fixed squeaky hinges, and even repainted part of the trim around the lobby window, using leftover paint she'd found in the supply closet. She never complained. She never asked for more than what she'd already been given. Luke watched her with quiet appreciation, unsure what to make of the woman who had arrived like a ghost in the rain and now moved through his world like she belonged there. One afternoon, as they reattached the porch railing, he glanced over at her. "You handy like this everywhere you go?" She smiled, a small, secret sort of smile. "Let's just say I like seeing things put back together." He nodded. He did not press. She had a way of answering just enough without ever giving away more. They began eating together in the tiny kitchen tucked behind the front desk. Luke cooked simple meals, canned stew, eggs, toast, and she washed dishes, drying each piece with the kind of focus that told him she needed the routine more than he did. Sometimes she told stories, never about herself, never about her past, but always little things. A dream she once had of opening a cafe, a memory of watching deer cross a snowy road, her favorite sound being the soft hum of distant thunder. He listened, and he noticed how often she looked out the window like she was expecting something, or someone. One night they sat together on the porch steps, watching the moon rise over the trees. The air was cold enough that their breath came in faint clouds. Luke passed her a mug of tea, and for a while neither of them spoke. Then he asked, "You got people looking for you?" Ella stiffened slightly. "Why do you ask?" "Just seems like maybe you left something behind, or someone." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Sometimes leaving is the only way to survive." Luke looked at her but said nothing. A long pause stretched between them. Finally, she stood. "Thank you for the tea." "Ella?" "I'm going to bed," she said quickly. The screen door creaked as she stepped inside and closed it behind her with a soft but final thud. Luke sat alone in the dark for a long time, mug growing cold in his hands. He did not know who she was. But he was beginning to suspect she was not just a lost traveler. And somewhere deep down, he feared the truth might be something far more complicated than he was ready for. The late afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows of the lobby, casting soft gold across the worn floorboards and faded wallpaper. The Sunset Inn, while functional, still looked more like a relic of the past than a place someone would intentionally choose to stay. Ella stood near the counter, surveying the space with a thoughtful tilt of her head. Luke was restocking the vending machine near the front door when she cleared her throat gently. "I was thinking," she said, "the lobby could use a little warmth. Some plants, maybe, or softer lighting. The welcome matters, right?" Luke looked over his shoulder. "You offering to be my interior designer now?" She smiled, the kind that had become more frequent in the past few days. "I could be, if you trust me with it." He set the last soda can in place and closed the vending machine door. "I've seen the way you organized the linen closet. I trust you." And so they began. Ella took charge of small improvements with an energy Luke found infectious. They moved furniture, repainted walls with soft, neutral tones, and reupholstered 2 armchairs using old fabric she had found in the supply shed. She found an old wooden sign buried behind the front desk and sanded it down to re-stencil "Welcome" in fresh white paint. Luke handled the heavier tasks, letting Ella guide the aesthetics. She had a way of seeing potential in things long forgotten, of making something whole again with only a few tools and a quiet persistence that Luke admired more than he cared to admit. They started eating breakfast together in the lobby's corner near the bay window, where Ella had set up a small potted plant and 2 mismatched chairs. "Do you ever think of leaving?" she asked one morning, sipping coffee. Luke shook his head. Left too much behind already. This place might be falling apart, but at least it's mine. Ella stared at her cup. I used to dream of having a place like that, something I could build from the ground up, not a mansion, just something that felt like home. Luke glanced at her. Why didn't you? She hesitated. Because not everything you're born into lets you choose who you want to be. It was the most personal thing she had ever said, and for a moment, Luke wondered if he should push. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded and said simply, Well, you've made this place better already. She smiled, small but real. Later that week, while looking for a screwdriver in the supply closet, Luke knocked over the small canvas bag Ella had tucked away on the top shelf. As it hit the floor, its contents spilled. Clothes, a half-used notebook, and a single sleek black card. It gleamed even in the low light, a high-end black titanium bank card with the name Isabella B. etched in silver. Luke stared at it, frozen. Ella entered the room just as he picked it up. Her eyes widened, and she quickly stepped forward, snatching the card from his hand. He raised his hands in surprise. You okay? She held the card tightly, her knuckles white. I didn't mean for you to see that. That's not exactly the kind of card someone uses at a corner diner. She turned away. It's just something I kept, for emergencies. Ella, what's going on? Who are you really? She didn't answer. Her breath quickened. I should have been more careful. Hey, Luke said, stepping closer. I'm not mad. I just want to understand. She shook her head, backing out of the closet. Please, just let it go. And with that, she turned and walked quickly down the hall, disappearing into her room. The door clicked shut behind her. Luke stood in the silence that followed, the truth beginning to press in at the edges of everything he thought he knew about the girl who had shown up in the rain. She had not just been running from bad weather. She was running from something far bigger, and he had the sinking feeling that their quiet life at the Sunset Inn was about to get far more complicated. The night was unusually still. A storm had passed through earlier, leaving the air dense and quiet, heavy with the scent of rain on warm earth. The Sunset Inn stood in the hush of midnight, its flickering porch light fighting off the darkness. Inside, Ella was curled up on the couch in the main office, a book resting on her lap, the soft hum of a space heater filling the room. Luke had gone to bed hours ago after finishing work on one of the plumbing lines in room 3. The power had flickered once earlier but then steadied. Ella didn't notice the faint smell of smoke at first, not until it began to thicken, curling beneath the door like a warning too soft to be heard. She stood, coughing once, then again, eyes darting toward the back hallway. That was when she saw it. The glow behind the door to the electrical room, orange and angry. She rushed forward, but the heat pushed her back. She tried the fire extinguisher, but it was old, rusted shut. The flames leapt fast. The dry wood of the inn fed them greedily. From his room, Luke woke to the sound of a loud crack, then the unmistakable scent of burning wires. He stumbled from bed, barefoot, and bolted toward the lobby. Ella, he shouted, coughing into his sleeve, but the smoke was already thick, blinding. He grabbed a wet towel from the sink and wrapped it around his face. The flames were crawling across the ceiling beams now. He moved toward the office. Ella, he shouted again, a faint voice, coughing, then nothing. He forced the door open and saw her collapsed near the couch, trying to crawl, her face pale, her hands shaking. Without thinking, Luke dove in. The heat seared his arms, the smoke clawed at his lungs, but he reached her. She was barely conscious. He lifted her in his arms and turned back toward the entrance. Each step was harder than the last. The roof groaned, the porch collapsed behind them as he stumbled into the night. He carried her across the gravel lot and fell to his knees in the wet grass near the road, laying her gently down. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. You're okay, he said hoarsely. You're safe. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then her eyes closed again. The fire department arrived minutes later. Luke sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering more from adrenaline than cold. Ella was taken to the hospital. Smoke inhalation, they said. She would recover. But Luke wasn't allowed to ride with her. Protocol. By morning, most of the front section of the Sunset Inn had burned. The fire marshal said it was faulty wiring. The town would send someone about the permits. Luke stood alone in the ashes, black soot clinging to his skin, the scent of ruin thick around him. That afternoon, when he returned from giving his statement, he found her room empty. No note, no bag, nothing. Except for the envelope on the front desk. It was thick, heavy. Inside, a check, 7 figures, and a handwritten note. He stared at the signature at the bottom. Isabella Beaumont. He read it twice. Then again. The note was short, just one paragraph in looping handwriting. I did not expect kindness from anyone, least of all from someone who had every reason to turn me away, but you helped me when I was no one. Use this to rebuild, not just the walls, but the purpose. Make this a place for people who need a beginning. Thank you for seeing me. For not asking who I used to be. Isabella. Luke sat down in the rubble, still clutching the paper, and let the rain begin to fall again around him. The fire had taken the building, but not everything had been lost. Something had been left behind, something greater than any name on a bank card, and he would not let it go to waste. Luke stood alone in the center of what used to be the lobby, now stripped bare and scaffolded with fresh beams. The sunlight filtered through newly installed windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The air no longer smelled of smoke, but of cedar and varnish, new paint and beginnings. The Sunset Inn was being rebuilt, better than before, and yet it had never felt emptier. Days turned into weeks. Contractors came and went. Luke worked alongside them, sometimes from sunrise to well past sundown. He poured himself into the repairs with a quiet determination, his hands always busy, his thoughts never still. When the check from Isabella cleared, there had been a moment, just one, when he considered returning it. But the note, folded neatly beside it, had stopped him. Use this to rebuild. So he did. He repaired the damaged rooms, upgraded the wiring, and replaced the roof. The new reception area was brighter, warmer. Ella's touch still lingered in the design, the color palette they had chosen together, the placement of the armchairs by the window, the little coffee bar she once joked about setting up. He built it anyway and placed a jar of sugar packets right where she said they should go. But every evening, when the tools were down and the lights dimmed, the silence pressed in harder than the walls. Luke had no way to find her. She had left no number, no address, no breadcrumbs to follow. Just a name. Isabella Beaumont. He had thought of looking her up online a dozen times, but every time he typed the name, his fingers hesitated. It felt like crossing a boundary she had chosen to keep in place. Maybe she did not want to be found. Still, some nights, he drove past the edge of town, the place where he had first seen her, standing in the rain, drenched and desperate, asking for a ride with a voice that held both fear and hope. He would slow the truck, stare into the dark roadside, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had left a piece of herself there, waiting. Then, one morning, everything changed. Luke was in the small cafe down the street, flipping through a worn newspaper while waiting for his order, when a photo caught his eye. A black and white image, small and sharp, embedded in the center of a page filled with business news. Isabella Beaumont returns after disappearance. Heiress re-emerges months after vanishing from public eye. Luke's hands froze. He leaned closer, heart thudding. The article spoke of a scandal, a high-profile family, whispers of rebellion, and a sudden disappearance that had sparked rumors across tabloids and boardrooms alike. It mentioned a trust fund, a corporate takeover, and a woman who had walked away from all of it without a word, only to reappear suddenly, quietly, and just as mysteriously as she had left. There was a recent photo. It was her. Ella. Her hair was pinned back, her posture perfect, but her eyes, those eyes he had seen lit by the glow of a fire, clouded with smoke, soft with unshed emotion across a breakfast table, they were unmistakable. He read the article twice, 3 times. She had returned to her world. The article did not mention where she was now, only that she had declined all interviews and was adjusting privately. Luke folded the paper carefully, sat back, and stared out the window. So she had a last name. A legacy. A life he had never imagined. But none of that was what stayed with him. What stayed was the sound of her laughter when paint spilled on his shirt, the way her brow furrowed in concentration while sanding a picture frame, the warmth of her hand on his arm the night she had first said thank you, not for the room, but for believing her when she could not say who she really was. She had left him a gift far greater than money. She had trusted him with her truth. Now all he could do was honor it. The Sunset Inn would open again in 2 weeks, and there would be a room just for her, left empty, not forgotten, in case the rain ever brought her back. The package arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Luke had just finished repainting the final window frame in room 6 when he saw the delivery truck pull up the gravel driveway. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, surprised. He was not expecting any supplies this week. "Package for Miss Luke Thorne," the driver said, handing over a slim box, long and flat with a New York return address printed in elegant script. Luke frowned. He took it carefully, thanked the driver, and brought it inside to the newly renovated lobby. The package felt too light for anything mechanical, too polished to be accidental. He slit the seal gently with his pocket knife. Inside he found 2 things. The first was a letter, handwritten on thick cream-colored paper. The ink was dark, neat, unmistakably hers. "Luke, I do not know if words are enough, but they are all I have now. I left quietly because I was scared, not of you, but of what being known by my real name might change between us. I thought that disappearing would protect what we had built. But I see now that silence is not always kindness. Thank you for the roof, for the warmth, for letting me be Ella when I could not yet be Isabella. Thank you for never asking more than I could give." Enclosed is a small photo I had taken. It was sent to me by someone passing through town. They said the inn looked even better than it did before. I knew you had finished it. I knew you would. Please keep going. Keep the Sunset Inn as a place where people feel like they are enough, just as they are. A safe stop in the middle of a storm. A soft light in the dark. With gratitude that words will never fully hold, Isabella P. If you ever find yourself in New York, I owe you a real cup of coffee. One that does not come from a gas station. Luke set the letter down slowly. His chest felt full, tight, warm in a way he had not expected. For a long time, he simply sat there, hands folded around the paper, reading and rereading her words. Then he reached into the box again and pulled out the second item. A photo. The Sunset Inn, taken from across the road, at just the right angle to show the newly rebuilt porch, the fresh flower beds, the hand-painted sign above the door. The paint still looked wet in the image, the light golden, as if caught at just the right hour. He smiled. Later that evening, as dusk fell, he stood in the hallway outside the newly renovated Room 9, the largest suite in the building. Once it had been damaged the worst in the fire. Now it gleamed with soft lighting, warm pine floors, and handmade furniture. He carried with him a carved wooden plaque. He had sanded it himself, stained it with care, and carved each letter with slow precision. Rain room for the night I almost lost everything and found something better. He fixed it to the wall just beside the door, stepped back, looked at it. It was not just for her. It was for everything they had created in that space between uncertainty and trust, between strangers in the rain and something more. Luke placed the photo of the inn on the counter at the front desk, beside a small vase of wildflowers. And then he whispered, not to anyone in particular, "She came through like a storm. But storms pass. And sometimes, they leave the world more alive than they found it." The grand reopening of the Sunset Inn dawned beneath a sky scrubbed clean by overnight rain. The clouds had scattered like old doubts, and the morning air carried the scent of fresh paint, brewed coffee, and 1,000 quiet hopes. Balloons danced at the mailbox. New curtains fluttered in every window. Locals stopped by with flowers, baked goods, and warm congratulations. Luke moved through it all with a quiet smile, shaking hands, pouring coffee, answering questions about the new rooms. But every so often, he found himself glancing toward the road, searching for something or someone that was not yet there. He told himself not to hope. By mid-afternoon, most of the guests had left. The lobby, once bustling, now held a gentle stillness. Luke stepped outside to breathe. The porch creaked under his boots, the same porch he had rebuilt after the fire, and then he saw her. She stood at the edge of the drive, framed by the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. No umbrella this time, no rain, no need to hide. Just her, hair pinned loosely, a light jacket hugged close to her figure, and a hesitant smile on her lips. He stepped down the steps without a word. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but steady. Luke stopped in front of her. "You came." She nodded. "I wanted to before, but I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." "You were always welcome," he said. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Isabella took a deep breath. "I left because I was scared," she said. "Not of you. Of being seen fully. Of being loved as me. Not the girl in the rain, not the heiress. Just me." Luke's eyes searched hers. "I never wanted anything more than that." "I know that now," she said. "And I'm sorry I made you wonder." He nodded slowly, letting the apology settle like rain into soil. "You didn't owe me anything. But I'm glad you're here." She smiled, but it trembled. "I came to ask if we could start again." "Start again?" Luke repeated gently. "I don't mean as strangers," she said. "I mean as partners. For this place. For whatever comes next. I want to be part of the inn. I want to help run it. I want to give people what you gave me. A safe place when they need it most." Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a brass key, attached to a tag that read, "Rain Room." "I kept this one for you," he said, holding it out. Her fingers closed around it, slow and reverent. "You're not starting over," Luke added. "You're continuing." They stood together at the base of the stairs. Then she asked, voice barely more than a whisper, "And what about us?" He smiled then, a real smile, the kind that felt earned. "I think," he said, "we're just getting started." That evening, as twilight spilled golden across the hills, Isabella helped Luke serve tea to their first guests. Eli, the local postman, took room 2. A mother and her teenage son, traveling west after a rough year, settled into room 6. Everyone laughed at the cookies being slightly burnt. Isabella blamed Luke. Luke rolled his eyes. The rain room stayed empty, but not for long. Isabella placed her suitcase by the bed before midnight, and in the quiet, with the window cracked open to let in the cool breeze, she whispered into the dark, "I'm home." Down the hall, Luke paused at the door. Then he turned, walked back toward the lobby, and turned off the porch light. He did not need it tonight. She had already found her way back. The Sunset Inn was never just a building. Not anymore. By late autumn, the rooms were nearly always full, not with tourists or corporate travelers, but with people passing through on their way to something better. Women escaping bad marriages, veterans rebuilding from nothing, young couples trying to start over. And each of them was greeted not by staff in uniforms, but by Luke and Isabella, often side by side at the front desk, a quiet warmth in their smiles. Luke fixed what broke, Isabella painted what was faded, and between them, the inn had begun to bloom into more than a place to sleep. It had become a home for those who needed a pause, a breath, a beginning. In the mornings, they made breakfast together, Luke flipping pancakes, Isabella laughing as she tried and failed to keep the coffee from overflowing. They added little touches with every passing month, books in every room, a community board for job postings, a pantry for those who came empty-handed. Sometimes, a guest left something behind, a thank you note, a sketch of the inn, a child's hand-drawn heart on the lobby wall. Those things stayed. So did Isabella. She never left again. Not for the boardrooms, not for the press. She turned down interviews and returned donations with polite letters that always ended the same way. We are not a foundation, we are a family. And this place? This place is enough. The rain room, the largest suite, was the only one not open to guests. It became theirs. At night, Isabella sat by the window, curled into Luke's arm, reading aloud from one of the paperbacks they kept stacked in uneven piles beside the bed. Sometimes, she read letters that had been sent to the inn, words of gratitude from people who had stayed only one night, but never forgot what it felt like to be seen. Luke built her a desk by the sunniest window. She never asked for it. He just saw the way she always moved toward the light. And she filled it with notebooks, maps of the area, postcards sent from former guests, and one framed photo of the motel, the way it looked before the fire, just to remember. The new sign at the entrance said it all. Sunset Inn, come as you are, stay as long as you need. Every Friday they held potlucks on the porch. Locals brought casseroles, musicians played under strings of lights, and kids ran barefoot through the grass. No one asked about money. No one asked about names. Everyone had a place. One evening, as leaves turned gold and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and cinnamon, Isabella and Luke stood side by side before the rain room. They had just finished welcoming a woman and her daughter fleeing from a violent home, guiding them gently to room 5, where fresh towels and soft lighting waited. Now the inn was quiet again. Lamps glowed behind windows. The stars began to appear, slow and certain, above the roof. Luke reached out and took Isabella's hand. She looked up at him, her eyes steady and full. "We built something," she whispered. He nodded. "Not just walls." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "This is more than I ever imagined." He looked toward the road, the same stretch where he had first seen her. A girl in the rain with no name and a story she was not ready to tell. And then he looked back at the inn, at the lives that had passed through its doors, at the woman beside him. "You changed everything," he said. She smiled. "You gave me a place to start." They stood in silence for a while, not needing to fill it with words, and as the breeze rustled the leaves, as the porch light flickered softly overhead, they both knew the truth. This was not a love story about grand gestures or perfect beginnings. This was a story about second chances, about what happens when kindness meets courage, and about the quiet miracle of finding home, not in a place, but in a person willing to stay. If this story moved you, the quiet courage, the unexpected love, and the power of choosing someone over and over, then you're exactly where you need to be. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we believe in the kind of tales that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Stories of healing, hope, and the kind of love that does not ask to be seen, but is felt in every quiet gesture. If you felt something tonight, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more heartfelt journeys just like this one. And remember, sometimes, all it takes is a rainy night, a kind stranger, and a place to belong. We will see you in the next story.